What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the ninth album by metal band Black Sabbath. Basically, this album is called Heaven and Hell, and it came out in the spring of 1980. Now, this is the first Black Sabbath album to feature the vocalist Ronnie James Dio, who did replace Ozzy Osbourne in the late 70s after he was booted from the band. And I would have to say, Ozzy did establish like a solo career, had some hit albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, which had hits on there like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley and Flying High Again and Over the Mountain, some of those type ones. Ozzy was definitely doing well, but I was kind of interested to see what Black Sabbath was up to just because I at least know like the one album Paranoid by Black Sabbath, which has the hit song Iron Man on there, and maybe like another single after that. But I don't know most of like the Ozzy years of Black Sabbath, but I wanted to check out this particular project just to see what Black Sabbath was like in the 80s because I wanted to check out this project by Black Sabbath to see what they were like in the 80s and see what Ronnie James Dio is about just because I did like Ozzy Osbourne's solo career, definitely like the two hit albums I've heard by him. I know there's way more. I'm going to have to see what more Black Sabbath is about because they were pretty much in their prime still in the 80s and such. So I do at least like the concept of seeing what Ronnie James Dio is like. But yeah, this is a pretty good hit album. This is definitely another classic for Black Sabbath. I would have to say I think I like Paranoid, at least the singles on there, but I would have to say I do like this 80s era of Black Sabbath. It's pretty interesting. This is definitely going to get a pretty rave score, and I like the valve as to what Ronnie James Dio did with it. I mean, it feels it's not quite as wholesomely metal. Maybe it's just because it's the early 80s and the riffs were not just quite as carnivorous, but I feel like these are just kind of more archaic sounding. I mean, they're good, but I definitely think the concept is compared to metal that like it just kind of I would have to say it just feels like more vanilla metal as far as that kind of goes. It just feels almost in a blend of being like light metal, just more commercial metal and more in like a hard rock kind of sense. That's kind of the vibe that I was getting towards it. I mean, that was fine back in like 1970 when like Iron Man was playing just because they were some of the initial bands apart from like Led Zeppelin and some of those type folks. But I look after it like yeah, when you listen to this is pretty riff heavy type stuff, but I still think there's a lot more shred action that just gets a lot heavier. But this is a good album. I mean, I'm talking like I'm going to give it a bad score. I'm talking like I'm going to give this Black Sabbath album like a bad score. It's actually going to get a pretty rave and classic score. This is another vintage album from them and definitely a hit album out of the early 80s as far as metal's kind of concerned. It's just very vanilla and just kind of feels plainer compared to some of the stuff that would be going on later. When I think of like Metallica's The Black Album, or when I think of like, maybe albums by like, Alice in Chains or those type folks, as far as that's kind of concerned, there's definitely some pretty shredded ones that kind of happen on here. But I look after it like this is good. I mean, this is kind of the concept. So we'll go ahead and talk about like the singles and such. Considering the fact that I don't know a ton about Black Sabbath, I did review their album 13 in 2013 and that type of stuff, but I don't know the sheer degree of like the full velocity of all the albums that they had as far as that kind of went. But I would have to say I at least know somewhat about Paranoid. I know that has like one of the signature rock songs, especially of classic rock for Iron Man. And I mean, I don't know a ton of Black Sabbath apart from Paranoid, which had the hit singles Paranoid, the title track, and then Iron Man on there, which was a staple of classic rock music and just overall rock music in general. This definitely has like a signature riff and that type of stuff. I'd have to look after it. This basically being the second album that I was introduced to by Black Sabbath. It's pretty good. I'm gonna have to mess with like 70s Ozzy Osbourne era, but I would have to say that this is pretty top notch. I do feel like it's kind of commercial fare, and I definitely like the concept of that, but it's just kind of the concept that like it's kind of prone to like it kind of reminds me of like ACDC's like Back in Black album where that one was very commercial, but it did I mean I think that one probably had more riffage as far as that kind of went, but this one just kind of has like it's interesting because this is kind of a metal album for a band called Black Sabbath. You would have thought that it would have been a lot more sheer, but it's not really like as it's just kind of interesting that these are pretty presentable and just overall radio ready. I was expecting more like something that would have been in more like the hardcore rock charts as far as that kind of went, but these are just actually pretty good ones. I mean, it doesn't have like commercial songs like you would expect from like Three Doors Down or like like Maroon 5 or something like that, but it does have like for rock, it's not pop rock, but it does feel like commercial metal as far as that's kind of concerned. That's not a topic that's overly conveyed as far as talking about commercial metal, but I like the concept of it. I'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. The first single is Neon Nights. So this is basically a bustling, kind of rambunctious bop for Traverse. I would say it feels motivated and it feels similar to Flying High Again by Ozzy Osbourne. So this is definitely one kind of has like that bustle about it, just a little bit more of a jivey one for stepping out, being out and about, car centric, that type of stuff, vehicle prone, some of those type moments as far as just like getting errands done or just being in your car for a lengthy while and just kind of going out and about and just having some times as far as that's kind of concerned. It's not like a full blown kind of shindig cut where drinks are spilling and that type of stuff, dancing's happening, but it is kind of one for just feeling a little bit motivated and wanting to get some stuff done and step out a bit. I do like those kind of bops just because there is some bustle about this album. It's kind of interesting. There's another one on here that's kind of like that. That's like I feel like lonely is the word is kind of like that, and die young is kind of like that also. So there are some. I feel like 2 out of 3 of the singles on this album kind of have that kind of bustling kind of feel about it. Neon Nights definitely has that feel, and then Die Young kind of has that feel also. So that's a good one. But to look after it, I actually almost want to say that there's 4 singles on this project because the most popular song on here is like Heaven and Hell, the title track, which has over 100 million plays. So I'm assuming that that really got some radio airplay. It seemed like album cuts from like 80s albums used to have that kind of happen, like with AC/DC and Ozzy Osbourne, some of those type moments. But I'll go ahead and talk about the second single next, which is Lady Evil. Lady Evil is basically like a murky hole in the wall bubbler, I would have to say. Definitely like this one. It's a low key kind of social bounce of a song, and it's just a lazy kind of flushed late day malaise. I definitely feel like this is just kind of a swashed one for just kind of being at pubs and some of that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes, just kind of atmospheric and just kind of more ambient, just in a more relaxed sense. I mean, I like the commercial kind of feel of this one. This really kind of feels like something you'd hear at like pub crawls and bars and that type of stuff, just kind of being more, I mean, it's a little bit engaging, but I look after it, it just kind of has like a more kind of mellow type feel. Lady Evil is kind of a more comfy and hangout type feel compared to Neon Nights and Die Young. I would have to say they're a little bit more engaging with the concepts of what they do. But I do like this one. It's just kind of a hole in the wall type tune for just kind of relaxing, getting some beer in your system, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Definitely a good bop. Then Die Young is the third single. And this is another good follow up. This is definitely another out and about tune. This is an out and about tune that's kind of steadfast in a bustling cut, I would have to say. And it's a straightforward hit, but it's kind of more hard rock. So this is what I was talking about with some of the vanilla metal type stuff on here that I just kind of feel like where it is kind of metal, but considering that the riffs are just not quite as, I mean, I feel like considering that the riffs are just more commercial, it kind of strikes me as more of like kind of motorcycle club and kind of more bar. It kind of strikes me as more like motorcycle and hard rock bar type places as far as that kind of goes, just within that sense. It's just kind of a lot more relaxed and just kind of more ambient, not quite as shred heavy as far as that kind of goes. I mean, it's good and it's definitely uppity and steadfast and bustling as far as that's kind of concerned, but it's just compared to like when you think of like Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne or something. You think of like Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne or Over the Mountain or some of those type ones. There's just a little bit more snappy at tempo, but these are definitely ones. Definitely feel like Neon Nights and Die Young are 2 ones that just have a very traverse and kind of out and about, kind of bustling type feel about them that just is engaging to the point where you just want to get up and do something. These are not necessarily just like nightclub or kind of bar songs, but they just kind of feel like more of just being just prone to kind of doing something as far as that's kind of concerned. They're just more in motion. But I do feel like Lady Evil's a pretty good hole in the wall type tune to kind of have as far as that kind of goes. That's some good stuff. And to basically talk about Heaven and Hell, this one might as well be a single just because of the airplay that it supposedly got. And it just is the most popular song on here. I'm going to go ahead and talk about this one. It's just kind of a contemplative tune that has like makeshift ease about it. I would have to say it's ready. It has a radio ready beat and it's pretty catchy. So this one's actually kind of a boppish one. This one's just I like the kind of ruminating type feel of this. Ronnie James Dio really nails this one as far as that kind of goes. Just very kind of thought provoking, but just kind of in an uppity kind of sense that this is kind of where it's thoughtful, but it's just not quite homely as far as that's kind of concerned. It's kind of I mean, this one I suppose is kind of interchangeable with being out and about and stuff. It can be at home or out and about or just something like that, but it just really feels radio ready. And this one, more so, it's just odd that a song that's an album cut had more popularity than the actual singles on here because this way outdid Neon Nights and Die Young and some of those type ones. But this is just an overall good radio cut, and it's just interesting. It's just interesting to be able to see that this one is just so affable in terms of just like airplay as far as that kind of goes. So it's just kind of one that just has like that makeshift kind of fare. Definitely probably at this stage like classic rock to kind of listen to, and it just is kind of one for just multitudes of places as far as that kind of goes. So I like Heaven and Hell. Definitely like the easy kind of bopish riff of that one. To talk about the songs I recommend on this album, really out of 8 songs on here, the only song I don't recommend is just Children of the Sea, which the thing about that song is just the fact that that one was just trying to be like an anthem kind of song, just more of like a stadium rocker, kind of like a power ballad, just wave your lighters in the sky type tune. But the riff was just not quite as engaging on that one. It just was like the only true one on here that didn't have like the most electric kind of feel about it. That's the only one I didn't really wholesomely connect with. So yeah, this album's going to get a 10 out of 10. Really liked it that well. Just some real affable stuff, and it proved that Black Sabbath could do Black Sabbath without Ozzy Osbourne. It's good to see. So basically, now you get 2 bands. You get Ozzy and you get Black Sabbath, just as far as that kind of goes. So some good stuff to kind of have that. I mean, I do feel like, I mean, this is a classic album. I am giving it a 10 out of 10, but I do feel like these riffs, I just realized it's just like, wow, I've heard so many more shredded kind of riffs on here. It's just interesting taking it back to 1980 to see some of these. But I do definitely feel like Heaven and Hell is like a nice radio ready bop. I think that could probably still get airplay today. I haven't heard it, but maybe I haven't, just haven't noticed. But it is a nice one. Neon Nights is a nice one. The singles are all good. But to talk about these other songs on here, like Wishing Well is definitely a bop. There's 2 songs on here that remind me of AC/DC as far as their Back in Black days, just with that kind of summer malaise. And those songs would be Wishing Well and Walk Away. And Wishing Well is definitely a good gem on here. This is a jivey kind of contemporary gem for social fare, I would have to say. It's got an engaging riff on there, and it's just vintage 80s metal. So this is definitely one. This really feels like Giving the Dog a Bone by AC/DC, just something like that. Just a real summer ready kind of riff. One of the better riffs on this album, I would have to say. This is probably one of the most snarled and gnarled kind of ones I definitely enjoyed. Wishing Well is definitely a good one. And then Walk Away is kind of like a summer malaise. It's kind of a ladies song on here. Definitely like this one. It's a summer malaise tune, kind of similar to AC/DC bops. Like when you think of She Shook Me All Night Long, that just really stretches across summer, something like that. Just a good, comfy gem for warm outdoor fun, I would have to say. Just really, it's interesting that Black Sabbath kind of had some of the summer malaise about them, because usually they're pretty metal heavy and just a lot more gnarled and headbanging type stuff, or at least 70s version, 80s version of headbanging type stuff. So that's kind of the concept about it, but it is good. Definitely some summer malaise. And then Lonely is the Word is kind of another nice one. This is a getting ready to step out cut. Definitely, it's an exhilarating gem with like a searing hot riff. Definitely like this one on here. It's good for some outings. So this is kind of one that's similar to I feel like Lonely is the Word is a good pairing of one with Lady Evil, where both of these are kind of more ones for getting ready to step out and have some more social times, where I feel like there's 2 Travers songs in Neon Nights and Die Young. I feel like Heaven and Hell is like the radio song, and then like Walk Away is kind of contemporary ladies song as far as that's kind of concerned, and then Wishing Well is kind of like just a good riff heavy one. But I feel like Lonely is the Word is a good pairing with Lady Evil, just as far as like that. I would say Lonely is the Word is probably the one to listen to before you get to like the pub or places that you're going to go in Lady Evil or something like that. This one's just kind of, I mean, it kind of has like a searing riff on here, really kind of electric kind of one as far as that kind of goes. But it's a good one to get energized to, I would have to say. So that's definitely kind of the concept about it. So basically, yeah, me liking 7 songs out of 8 on. Yeah, I would have to say me liking 7 songs out of 8 on here. This album definitely gets a 10 out of 10. The social score, that's kind of tricky. I think I'm going to give the social score like an 8.75 out of 10, because it did have basically about 4 singles, but some of these I kind of feel like they're plainer. And when I just question if you had the choice between playing like Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train or Flying High Again or something like that, if you're going to hear songs like Neon Nights or Lady Evil or Die Young over those particular songs. I think they're good, but I just wonder about the distinction as far as their lastability as to nowadays. Like, I think at least of the Ronnie James Dio days, you would at least hear Heaven and Hell, but I just don't know the oftenness of how much of rock staples, 40 years later that they are. So I just look at, I mean, the singles are good. They're definitely vintage and classic rock songs. I would like to hear them, but I just don't know the oftenness as to how they would for today's times. So this is kind of the thing. So they're just kind of relics as far as that's kind of concerned. So it gets an 8.75. But in terms of the future, like Black Sabbath is like supposedly retired. Once again, they've been here since like the early 70s. So they've been here for quite some time, 50 something years. But I look after it like, as far as that's kind of concerned, they do have a good assortment of content. I'm going to have to get to some more of these, but this is definitely a classic album. I definitely like the Ronnie James Dio days thus far, as from what I've seen of them.